Looks like we found ourselves in an apocalypse of sorts. Bummer.
Titanfall, from the same minds that blessed us with Modern Warfare 2. No, not that one. Yeah.
It was one of the first noteworthy games to come out for the 8th generation of consoles. When the PS4 and Xbox One first launched back in 2013,
there wasn't much that they would showcase that would make you think, oh shit, I need to get me a PlayStation 4 or Xbox One. There seemed little reason to upgrade. It didn't seem like the newer consoles were offering experiences that couldn't be done on older hardware. A lot of the games were just shinier versions of what was already being released on the last gen. And it's not really the game developers' fault. The performance that they could squeeze out of the older hardware had already plateaued while they were just getting started with the new hardware, so improvements were incremental, while devs were still figuring out how to utilize the new hardware at its max. The leap to the 7th generation seemed a lot bigger than the leap to the 8th generation. Besides the tech, there wasn't much of a shift in the type of games that came out on these consoles compared to the leap from the 6th to the 7th gen, for example. With the leap to the 8th gen, there was less of a shift with the type of games that would come out.
During this period of shifting generations, fatigue for the Call of Duty cycle, and by extension the modern military shooter, which was dominating the 7th gen, was beginning to creep up. The most recent game at that point, Call of Duty Ghosts, was the start of a decline in the franchise's reception. It was the first in the franchise to be hated by a large portion of the fan base, and while I may understand some of its criticisms, I think a lot of the hate was unwarranted. But that's a conversation that's beyond the subject of this video. After the immense backlash from Ghosts,
you couldn't fault the heads up to think that what the franchise needed was a great shakeup. But it wasn't just Call of Duty. The whole FPS genre needed a big shakeup. In came Titanfall, which dropped down into the gaming scene from the sky to really shake things up. At its core, it maintains all of the genre conventions that we've grown accustomed to, but elevates it to a whole other level with jet thrusters, wall running, and most of all, Titans. It offered what was pretty much the last big spin that you could have for the modern military shooter, at least for its time. This seemingly started a wave within the first-person shooter scene, where every game coming out was some sort of sci-fi shooter. Now I know that's not literally the case. Shooters didn't become sci-fi because of Titanfall. Destiny was conceptualized as far back as Halo 3 ODST in 2009, but it's safe to say that Titanfall was the pioneer for the shift of backdrop for the popular shooters of its era. Back in middle school, I would scour the internet in the computer lab to find out what the hottest games were. The game that caught my attention the most was Titanfall. I would read up article after article about it, then I would go home and watch review after review about it, marveling at its gameplay. It truly felt like the next-gen shooter that the 8th gen needed. It's the game that made me want to have a powerful PC of my own. As time went on, however, newer things came and went, and eventually, Titanfall fell out of my radar. There came a point where I could play Titanfall, but by then it was a couple of years old and my attention was set on other games. You could only play it through Origin as well, which did it no favors. Fast forward about a decade, I was chilling in my local game cycle, browsing the shelves, when I saw Titanfall on Xbox 360. My first thought was, holy shit, Titanfall for only $4? My second thought was, holy shit, Titanfall's on Xbox 360? Yes, as it turns out, a 360 port was made for, well, the Xbox 360. So much for the next-gen experience. Or so, that's loosely how the story goes. I think I was aware of the facts prior, it just slipped out of my mind at that point. What an odd product to exist. Oh well, I wasn't gonna take another second to make a decision. I took that to the counter and bought it with $4 Canadian. As I admired the box art, I noticed a few labels on the box that you wouldn't find on your typical Xbox 360 game. Hard drive required is a label that appeared more throughout the later half of the 7th gen due to the higher quality textures not all being able to fit on one disc. That made sense, considering this is a next-gen title that they crammed onto the 360. Online only and Xbox Live Gold required, sold separately, however, is one that I had never seen before. Given that it's a multiplayer shooter first, that's surely for the multiplayer experience. There must surely be some sort of single-player content, like an offline tutorial to get you familiar with the game, or team deathmatch with bots, which was quite standard in games offered by the competition.
There's only one way to find out. Let's pop this in and play some Titanfall.
When first starting the game, we were met with a loading screen for downloading HD assets. Woo! Let's not forget, they crammed a next-gen experience into a last-gen console, so there being some concessions to make the game run makes sense. Huh. Well, okay. So much for that. That's a real shame.
It's easy to forget about these things when you live in a society with internet, but in an apocalypse, when your game is tethered to an internet connection, it becomes worthless. It doesn't stand on its own. Now, this is just a disc with which you can't do anything.
I read somewhere on the internet that all of the AI for the Titans and soldiers are actually running server-side, which is why you can't play offline with bots. But I think that's just a flimsy justification. I think they just made a poor decision during the development stage. They could have easily designed a portion of the game to be accessible offline. Maybe. I'm not a game developer. I'm just a gamer talking in front of a camera.
Since this review would be cut so short otherwise, as a bonus, let's take a look at how the game runs on the newer gen hardware.
The Xbox One. We're installing the game straight off the disc. Offline. Of course.
How else do you expect to play this game in an apocalypse?
Alright, let's boot her up. Yep, this is worse than the 360 version.
So that's Titanfall. While its status within the gaming landscape has stuck around for a little bit and has even made a resurgence in recent times, as a conversation piece it came and went. The game is subject to heavy criticisms when it first came out because,
if you don't recall, there was a short-lived trend where, with this new ground of a new console generation, some gaming companies were trying to define what next-gen gaming was by selling multiplayer experiences at full price while removing the single-player component, and Titanfall was just that. A multiplayer-only title selling at full price. After Titanfall's release, Respawn Entertainment seemed to have listened to its criticisms and addressed its problems in the sequel, Titanfall 2, which does contain a single-player campaign.
by extension, all games that went this route thankfully got a lot of backlash. So games that went this route either fell really hard or the decisions were reverted in the latter iterations of the games.
This seemed a bit crazy back then. If only we knew what was to come after. I actually did get Titanfall when it dropped on Steam, before finding it at a game cycle. It's definitely the more playable version of the game. To give my brief thoughts, it's decent. Coming to it after playing Titanfall 2 first, it felt rougher around the edges. However, it laid the groundwork for the incredible Titan and pilot action, and had a stronger visual aesthetic, with the emphasis on the grit of the combat. Some things it just does better, like the more available options for the Titan customization. It's like the original Modern Warfare, competent, but without the subtle quality of life improvements that the sequels introduced.
So yeah, that's Titanfall on Xbox 360. Word is you got a copy of Titanfall. Yeah, come on in. Bro, this shit's lame as f***.
Yeah, well, no, it is. It's oh, God.
This looks like an Among Us, like, master collection.
Oh, there you go. Have a good one. That's my number one scientist doing. If I did any good.
Look at all this.
$1 each. Jesus Christ.
Oh,
No. North Star's a bright star, but
Alan Wake.
it's definitely up there.
Literally up there.
Yeah.
Be the happiest.
So.